quick sound check. This needs to turn on, and this and this. I think that should be all of that. Alright, let's see. I think everything is in order and we may begin. So, welcome back everybody to more Voyager dev streams. And if you're new here, which I think quite a number of you are, this is where I just stream myself talking and working on my little tabletop RPG project, Voyager. There is been quite a bit of progress. I mean, I had to sort of suspend last week's stream schedule, but we're back at it this week, and quite a lot of progress is made between then and now. Very quick progress actually, and we're gonna, I guess, recap and go through a bunch of these changes. The community has been growing a substantial amount. We've got in touch with like different artists, and I've been joining some other tabletop discords, namely the Fabula Ultima server, just to sort of like communicate and join other people, and it's just sort of been a productive week, and hopefully this week will be just as productive. So what I wanted to touch on today is the various changes that I've been workshopping for version 0.5 of Voyager. Before that, I want to say hi to all the familiar and new people. So we've got Letters and Pedal Coma, hello again, and some new folks in the server, Pau, and which is Hero Medley, one of the artists we sort of wrangled into the project, and Jan Kodiak from the Fabula server, I believe, or no, rather you're a friend of Pau's, but it's sort of a lot of cross-pollination between the servers. But what we wanna go on here, I need to switch this to Clip Studio actually, and does that show up? Yes. So I'm gonna touch on, so there's a few things we want to tackle today, which is the changes to the action economy, and talking a bit more about creating a sort of GM-less system, meaning a system where the game master's involvement is not as all-encompassing as what you would typically expect, and that's something I'll get onto probably an hour later. But right now, I want to talk real quick about some changes I made to the gameplay for 0.5, which is action economy. So real quick, so we're currently on version 0.5 of Voyager Tactics, and a lot of changes to the action system, how dice are rolled have been made, and a lot of them have been changed for various reasons, but a lot of them is sort of following some basic design philosophies. So let's say design pillars right here, and what I wanted to tackle with namely Voyager's action system these past few versions is, number one, I wanted, let me change the font real quick, change it to okay. So I wanted tactical tile-based combat. So this is sort of like your Arc Knights plus your Fire Emblem, and that's sort of, I guess, the main pillar. Let me get this. And so I know that we're gonna have tiles. We're gonna have like certain set ranges for things. Very, I guess, like Final Fantasy Tactics as well. So wanted to have that certain level of groundedness to the system. But then pillar 2, I also wanted reactive combat, right? So the easiest comparison I can make is either to like Genshin or League team fights. So in Genshin Impact, you can sort of combo elements together, like you can set enemies on fire, or you can put like some sort of hydro water application on them, and then another teammate can sort of freeze them. So I like that kind of the idea that you could sort of react to have these sort of tag team attacks on enemies, which is also like a Ruby thing, right? So even in Ruby, at least in Volume 2, they had like these sort of tag team attacks that you can synchronize with your allies, and something close to what you would find in like a League of Legends team fight, which just generally is like a MOBA team fight where you sort of have like a bunch of people fighting, and you can sort of combo things together with your teammates, such as like an ally charging into the enemy group, which like stuns them, and then another one stuns them, so you're like stacking stuns upon stuns, while another teammate sort of like cleans them up by shooting them. So basically have this sort of room to implement this sort of reaction-based combat within the action system while having the tiles. So that's, and then the third pillar, of course it had to be like anime-y. So, and by anime I specifically mean like Ruby, or like, let's see, I mean mostly like Ruby, I'd say. So things like being able to like jump around, dash across great distances, combo attacks together, so what I've been trying to do with the system these past few months, or even like the past year, I'd say, is trying to find a sort of happy medium that can accommodate all of these intended pillars I wanted to make. So obviously I think the main two that sort of, I guess, are a bit hard to balance is these two, because both of them they slightly contrast each other, because what I've seen for, let's say, something like a Ruby style tabletop, which I've seen a lot of different takes on it from, you know, fans who try to make fan-made tabletop systems involving Ruby. Some, I believe most of them, would implement a very more abstracted style of combat, which means abstracted distances, meaning you do not calculate by the number of tiles, you just sort of theater of the mind, where you sort of say, oh, the enemy is within melee range, or they're very far, or they're nearby, and that's sort of how other tabletops that try to implement the Ruby system try to sort of justify a lot of the more anime style action that happens. Hello Red Kitty, welcome to the stream. Talking about our action system for version 0.5, and what I've where was I? So yeah, and as for something like Arc Knights or Fire Emblem, well, let's use Fire Emblem as an example first, because that's kind of more grounded. You sort of have like these troops that you can only move like a few tiles at a time, and you have certain attack ranges, and so they both sort of seem very different from each other. One has very kind of like grounded results, meaning your specific tile distances, whereas the Ruby one seems more abstract because you want to have an amount of room to sort of create unusual actions or tag team attacks that would be sort of stifled by a more like rigid system that involves tiles. So I sort of wanted to find a way to sort of fuse the two together in a way I liked. And interestingly, Arknights sort of tackles this because Arknights doesn't have movement. It's a tower defense game, but it does have tiles, and each character has like unique abilities and that give them unique attacking ranges basically, and this is very heavily influenced on like some of the earlier versions where certain like weapons and such have like very clear ranges. I can even pull up like some of the old notes, some of the old diagrams I drew, which is, let's say for this, so something like this, which I think it was for version 0.2 or 0.3, where like this ranged character has like, let's say 3 tiles of range, and then you can sort of attack anything within that range. And this is very much an Arknights influenced decision, but then so this was sort of one of the versions I went with, and it sort of ran into some problems because it went into ability bloat, where each ability had its own unique range. So some of them would have 1 tile, some of them would have many tiles, some of them had global range, just like Arknights. But that led to one character having like a bunch of abilities that have a lot of different tile ranges you had to memorize, which I think ended up being like way too much work to like sort of figure out yourself, to like write down, to memorize. So that led to some problems of, I guess, crunch bloat. And crunch is just basically like the crunchy mechanical aspects of the game, as opposed to like lore or story. And one of the other like sort of design philosophies I wanted, which is, let me make a new one, which is, so for the main sort of I guess design philosophies I wanted with Voyager is that I wanted something that had good crunch but light bookkeeping. And what I mean by this is I liked systems that have tactical combat. So things like D&D or Pathfinder, where there is like a map with a grid instead of an abstracted distance system, and you could actually control and move how much you move, what abilities you choose, and how much area that affects. I wanted to have that kind of tactical aspect to Voyager. So that's the crunch aspect, because obviously you're sort of actually calculating the distances, but I didn't like bookkeeping. So this is from my experience playing 5th edition, and even like a Ruby campaign that I was on, and even a bit of like even more like abstracted games like Vampire the Masquerade. What I noticed is anything that, what I mean by bookkeeping is things that forced you to recall or consult your book or your sheet in the middle of something. So in D&D's case, when you're fighting and you sort of want to cast a spell on an enemy or target, the bookkeeping problem that you would run into is, do I remember my spells? How many spells do I have? Do I have the spell slots? Am I able to cast the spell? How much damage does the spell do? I have to roll, what type of dice do I have to roll for it? What is the save on that spell? Meaning, how much, does the enemy have to roll to beat, how much does the enemy have to roll, otherwise they get affected by the spell, and all that kind of stuff. So that is like bookkeeping that, of course, you wouldn't be expected to memorize all of that at once. That in combat would sort of stall things and make turns take longer. And this was kind of a thing in the World of Darkness game I played as well, because combat and like other stuff is abstracted in the World of Darkness games, which to sort of summarize is basically like you roll a bunch of dice together, and then you count the number of dice that roll over 6 or 4 or 5. Basically, the higher you roll, the more successes you have. So that alone is quite straightforward. But what led to sort of a bookkeeping issue is the skills, I believe. So, and this may just be me being like a blockhead, because I'm really like, it's like a very different system from what I'm used to. But the skills in the World of Darkness games is like, you have your attributes. So the attributes were different there, but it's sort of like how in D&D you have like dexterity and constitution. So vampire has that, but with different names. And to use your skills, you had skills like hacking and talking to people and things like that, but you also needed to roll an attribute plus the skill together. So if you wanted like hacking or whatever, you sort of need to combine that with the modifier from your intelligence or your, I don't even remember what it is actually, but like you needed to combine the modifier from the stat with the modifier from the skill, and then you roll those dice together. And in any given moment, I just forget which skill goes to which attribute, because it's not explicitly written on like the sheet or anything. There's no like cheat sheet that shows you, okay, you combine this with this to get this. It's just sort of there. And so a lot of the times I'm just sort of relying on my GM, the storyteller in the game, to sort of tell me, okay, what do I roll, because I have no idea which stat goes with which skill. And that's a problem. So that's another thing I wanted to tackle, which is how do I have a tactical tile-based combat system that emulated that kind of vibe I liked with like Arknights, Fire Emblem, that encouraged me to plan out my moves and synchronize different actions together, and combine it with a lack of need for bookkeeping, meaning like things that you had to track. So obviously, like if you're using Fire Emblem as an example, obviously it uses a computer to calculate everything, but Fire Emblem has stuff like health, it has stats, meaning like your attack, your your dexterity or whatever it is for your range skills. It has crit chance, so it has all that stuff that a computer will calculate. But how would you sort of capture that same sort of thing within a game that you had to calculate everything yourself, meaning a tabletop game? And that's sort of a problem that I've been trying to solve for all these versions. And I think I may have what could be the best system to solve this so far. And I don't mean best as in it's the coolest or the most exciting, but I think based on all these goals that I set out, this system that I've been workshopping so far seems to be able to handle all three. So, and this is what I've called the action duration dice system, or ADD. So ADD, but not attention deficit disorder. Not that, but I have that too. But what I wanted to go to Scribus actually. So let me run real quick to Scribus. No, not this one. This is the wrong scene. Okay. Yeah, so let's see. Presumably this is the goal of third-party systems like Alchemy, but who wants to pay $30 to have more book systems they'd have to buy? Well, yeah. Alchemy is an app. I think it's on Kickstarter, or it may have already been funded, where it's sort of is a VTT, a virtual tabletop like Foundry or Roll20, but it was focused more on narrative style play, meaning it didn't really have like maps or stuff like that, but it had more tools geared towards like role playing and like narrative sort of things where you sort of go back and forth talking between each other. But of course, you know, like you've mentioned, it's all like extra stuff that you have to pay. But of course, I wanted something that, you know, had a kind of simplicity baked into a system. I wouldn't even say simplicity. The word that I always want to use in regards to my goals for designing Voyager tactics is elegance. So by elegant, I mean something that may be complex, but when it's elegant, or when I say the goal is to be elegant, I want it to be something that seems complex but straightforward in figuring it out. Meaning that if I were to teach you the system and tell you about its different concepts, it should make you go and say like, yeah, I think that makes sense when you put it that way. Like, so action dice was sort of like the first main breakthrough with this, where, and this is from version 0.4, where to really quickly explain action dice is basically you have 5 different combat actions. So let me just zoom in real quick here. So you have 5 different combat actions, which is move, save, hit, aim, and cast. So move is to move, save is to defend or heal, hit is melee, aim is ranged, and cast is magic or anything more complex than that. And whenever you use one of these actions, you just roll a dice to see what is the outcome. So if I say wanted to roll a move, it says 5, so that means I move 5 tiles. If I wanted to hit something, I roll a 6, that means I deal 6 damage. So this was the first main pillar that I'm basing like the core systems around, because it's very, I would say it's very intuitive, because it's very straightforward to understand. It's very visually simple as well to figure out, like, okay, you know, the roll on the dice shows how much I can move, how much damage I deal, and, you know, dividing them into very clear actions also makes it very easy for decision making. So then that led me to this current action system. So in 0.4, what we used to have was an AP system. Actually, I'm trying to remember what did I use for 0.4. Where you had an action point system. So you had like 3 AP, and with 3 AP, so it's kind of like Pathfinder, right? Where you have these action points and you would spend them. Divinity Original Sin is also like this, to cast actions. So anything from 1 AP to 2 AP, 3 AP for more powerful stuff, and that's a pretty common action system in most in most games that use action points. So there's like two types. There's two types of action, major action systems, just to sort of like lay down the groundwork here. So there's two main action systems, which is, let me just get rid of this. So the first type is action types, and this is what you would expect from something like Dungeons and Dragons. So you have so the types of actions you can do are divided into certain archetypes. So you have like a move action, you have like a main action, like just your action, and then you have like a bonus action, and then you have like a reaction. So that's like the D&D method where you know, your action is normally used to attack, stuff like that, and sometimes your bonus action is something quicker than that. But if you don't have like anything that uses a bonus action, you can't use it. So that led to people shifting more to like a Pathfinder action point system, which is just like a general amount of AP that you use to spend on any type of action. So whether it is a reaction, a bonus action, or anything like that, it just says you use 1 AP or 2 AP. And I've done some research. They both have their own pros and cons, because obviously the pros with AP is that it's much more versatile. You can sort of basically anything you can think of, you can probably like define it as 1 AP, 2 AP, and it's, you know, a lot more flexible to work with. But the advantage that action types have is it's a lot easier to I guess cognitively figure out what actions fit into which. Meaning, like, you know, let's say if I have a fireball or like some kind of illusion spell, or if you want to like homebrew something, like make a custom spell, you kind of have to figure out how many AP does it cost. Does it cost 1 or 2 or 3? It's a bit more abstract, but with action types, it's sort of easier because you can just say, oh, it uses an action. And I think it's more beginner friendly as well, because for beginner you just have to say, okay, in most cases you just have to worry about what's your main action for that turn. Whereas for action points, it can lead to analysis paralysis, where you just kind of like stuck during your turn, kind of figuring out what you want to do, because, you know, oh, I can use 1 AP to here, and then 1 AP to do this, and 1 AP to do that, which is good for tactical gameplay, but it can foreseeably lead to long turn times, meaning like, you know, oh, what if I want to do this, but it costs less AP to do, and maybe this and that, so it leads to a lot of thinking, which I do want there to be thinking involved, but not, you know, to a extent that it causes like a traffic jam at the table. And so that so going back to version 0.4, the previous version, the last thing we did, so let me just pull up the old version if I have it here. Pull up the browser. Where is it? Voyager Tactics. Okay, so let me go real quick to the old 0.4 version, where we had the action loadout system. So I like the action dice system, where you roll and then you sort of figure out how much damage or movement you have based on that. But then what built on top of that was the action loadout system, and what that did was basically you had a set of 10 actions you could do. So this was based on your class. So if your class had more aim dice, basically like more aim actions, that means you are more of a ranged type class. So this one, this loadout has 4 hit dice, hit actions, meaning it was a more melee focused class. So that meant like your class sort of determines the number of actions you can take during your turn, and then every time you took a turn, you would eliminate one of the actions until you had used up all 10, and then it resets back again. And the problems that led to, well, I won't say problems, but just like potential issues was what we noticed is that the resetting mechanic felt a bit gimmicky, because at that point a lot of people were just doing whatever they could to reset as fast as possible, meaning they were like, you know, doing certain actions or whatever, or using all of their dead actions to just sort of so that they can reset as soon as possible. And of course it led to a bit less, I guess, freedom in like building what sort of actions you wanted, meaning like you kind of had to follow this if you took the class. But and you know, I was experimenting with this for a while, like, or maybe you can sort of choose which ones you want to pick, like what combinations you had, and one of the classes did have this, the Venator, where you would choose at character creation what types of actions you wanted in your loadout. But I did like the visual of it, like having like this kind of thing on your sheet that you can actually refer to and check your actions. I did like that, but it did, you know, lead to some dead ends in regard to like design. And going back to what I said about wanting to have kind of that tactical feel alongside the more like Ruby style combat, one thing I think version 0.4, the version 0.4 sort of fell short with is that it was not fully able to facilitate unusual actions. So normally, of course, this was following more of the tile-based system. So I mean, if I go to like, let's say, the techniques. So the techniques are basically like free abilities that you can use. Well, not free, but you can learn them. They're like sort of like weapon techniques, meaning like you could use it to wall run, you could use it to extend your attack range, or you could use it to taunt, stuff like that. So these were of course they had like certain tile ranges that you could use, and you would spend those actions in order to use them. And what I sort of came across is there wasn't much accommodation for if you wanted to do something that was not included in this. And this was sort of catalyzed from when during one of the games a player asked if they could do something as a reaction that they didn't learn. So I think it was something here that they didn't learn but that they could use as a reaction, right? So then we ruled in that case that you would spend another action, you would spend an additional action to make it a reaction, so that, you know, it had like a cost of doing so, since you didn't learn that ability, so you kind of had to do like a more inefficient version of it. But what that sort of clued me in on is that someone may have like a suggestion for something they want to do, and if they didn't have it learned, or, you know, if they didn't have that ability, then technically they would not be able to do it. And of course this makes sense, because, you know, in most I guess RPGs of this nature, that's kind of naturally assume, if you're a wizard and you don't learn Fireball, you shouldn't be able to cast Fireball. But it's a bit more ambiguous for like combat moves, and like parrying, stuff like that. Like, should you have to learn the parry technique in order to know how to parry, or would it just make sense for your character to know how to parry based on whatever you wrote for the character? So that was a problem I wanted to tackle. And even for like the classes, the ventures here, you would they had like a certain list of abilities, but like I said, if you didn't learn those abilities, then you wouldn't be able to use them, and then it might sort of limit what you can actually do, which I think, if I were to accept that as part of the game itself, so like it can't be helped, that's it's sort of assumed that you need to learn the ability to do something, so whatever you do is just based on if you're level 1, you get like, oh, I'm gonna do a basic attack, I'm gonna move around, and then only later I get to learn more cool stuff to do. I could have just assumed that that's sort of baked into the game in order to engage and play with it. That's just sort of how you have to deal with it. But I thought about how to sort of address that issue, because if I wanted to make something that was more clearly like based on like Ruby and like all these other games, and I'm trying to like target that audience as well, meaning target audiences who are fans of these games, and who would be familiar with these sort of things, and they had an idea of how to do their turn or something cool they wanted to do. How would I enable them to do so? Which then led me to the this new system, the ADD system. So going back to Scribus, so what I have right now is, let me go way up. So let me do a very quick rundown of how the system works. So this is what I would say is like a hybrid system. So I mentioned just now there was like 2 different action types. There was the action type, we have the action, bonus action, reaction, stuff like that, and you have AP, and those are normally 2 different systems. This system is a hybrid of the 2. So to put it in short terms, you have 3 AP per turn. Okay, that's straightforward enough. And each type of action has an AP cost. So you can see here, a fast action has 1 AP cost, a medium action has 2 AP cost, and a slow action has 3 AP cost. So if you had 3 AP in a turn at any given time, that means you can take one of 3 different type of combinations of actions. So you can take 3 fast actions in a row, so 1 AP, 1 AP, 1 AP, 3 times. You could take a medium plus a fast, so 2 plus 1 equals 3, and this is what you would typically expect in like a D&D style turn, meaning 2 actions to like move and then to hit something. That's normally how it goes in D&D. You have like kind of 2 major things that you can do, and it's sort of like that, medium plus fast. And then if you want to do something really big, like you want to charge like a big fireball or something, then that would be a slow action which costs you 3 AP. And so that's kind of easy to understand so far. And how this differs is that before this in version 0.4, and I think in most RPGs, so even in like Pathfinder or Dungeons and Dragons, reactions are a separate category from actions, meaning that if there is a reaction in D&D. Let's say there was a monk ability in D&D. I forgot what it's called, but it allowed you to like catch projectiles out of the air, right? So you know, when if someone shoots something at you, you can spend a reaction to catch it. But that was like its own thing, right? You can't like catch. You can't use the catch projectile reaction as your action. And in Pathfinder, this is the case with a lot of reactions as well. It's sort of like written there. You cannot use this reaction. I mean, sort of generally understood. You cannot use this reaction as an action, and you cannot use an action as a reaction, because you know it would sort of mess around with the. Because you know, obviously, if you can react to everything, then you know it can sort of mess up the turns. So, but what this one is trying to accomplish is any sort of action that you make here, you can also use as a reaction. So, whether it's to, let's say, the most basic thing you can do, which is to hit someone, right? To swing your sword, you can do that as a action. Using, let's say, one medium action, right? So I want to swing my sword on my turn, and that's a medium action. But if say I wanted to react with it, like let's say I see this guy, he's about to like walk past me to reach my ally. I want to react to hit him, so that, you know, to strongly discourage him from doing so. But then it's not my turn. So I would say that I want to react to him doing that and spend 2 AP to do so. Okay? So then all you would need to do is you will just declare, if it's on your turn, then obviously it's just an active action. But if it's not your turn, you would declare that you would like to react, meaning you will turn that action into a reactive action. So that's how that works. So, and this is still kind of straightforward. I've seen a few systems that kind of use this. DC-20 RPG comes to mind, which is a system that Dungeon Coach makes, which is another YouTuber who largely makes D&D content, but he's sort of making his own system, kind of based on what he learned from D&D and Pathfinder. Is that in his system, you have action points that you can spend to react and all that. But from researching these sort of systems, I found that watching another video by Matt Colville, who is another D&D YouTuber, but he's also making his own system, and what he said stuck out to me because he was also using like a reaction system, not as in depth where you can like do anything, but it's sort of like, you know, like a counter attack, let's say, right? And he was saying that we were testing a system where you could use a counter attack, and if the counter attack was a critical or, you know, succeeded, you could take another action at no cost, right? Or something like that. So it gave you like a free turn, and a lot of players liked it, obviously, because it allowed them to do more stuff. But one hurdle he encountered when doing that is that it was very easy for the players to lose track of what's happening, because let's say it's the goblin's turn, and the goblin attacks you, and then you counter attack, and then you get a free turn, and then you do all sorts of stuff within that turn, and then maybe your ally can react to that, and your ally can react to that, and then that would lead to circumstances where everyone be like, okay, so whose turn is it now? You know, like, are we back to the goblin, that kind of thing. So it sort of like messes with the initiative order, and that was something that stuck out to me. And to sort of address that, I sort of had this sort of basic system for calculating reactions. So each so like I said here, so just remember this, that 3 AP per turn, and then 3 types of actions: fast, medium, slow, which has 1, 2, 3 cost, and then within that 3 AP you will be able to do either one or a few of those actions. So in terms of reactions, so let's say someone were to, you see an enemy goblin, right? And the goblin does a fast action, let's say to try like stab someone, right? And you want to react to it to stop him. How do I put this? You can only react to an action, or rather, when an action is declared, you have that many AP to react to it. So the amount of reactions that can be done against an action is equal to its AP cost. So what I mean by this is the goblin spends 1 AP to attack, and you would spend 1 AP to react to it, to attack or to move or anything you want, or to dodge. You cannot spend 2 AP, you cannot make a medium action to do anything, you cannot spend 3 AP, you can only spend a number of AP equal to that action. So it's sort of like imagining if the goblin is doing something really fast, you only have a very fast window of time to actually do anything about it. So a fast action can only be countered by a fast action. So if, let's say, it's a medium action, so the goblin does like a moderate sized attack with their sword. So that is 2 AP, right? So the goblin spends 2 AP to attack you, and at that point you have 2 AP to do something about it if you chose to. So you can react to either like 1 AP to just like dodge out of the way, or you can spend 2 AP to sort of attack him while he's attacking you or something like that. So there is an equivalent cost here because he's performing an attack that is of a medium duration, so you have a medium amount of time to do something about it. And so of course, using this example here, where we have like a dragon that is charging up a fireball, right? So it spends 3 AP to charge a fireball, and if you do not do anything about it, then the fireball goes off and hits you. But you can choose to do something about it, and only 3 AP can be spent by anyone to react against it. So meaning that the dragon charges up a slow action, which is 3 AP. So in this case, one player uses 2 AP to try to stop it, while another uses 1 AP to dodge out of the way. And then that's it. No one else can react to it at that time. So it's equal to the sum of the reactions that can be made is equal to the sum of the AP used for that action, and then after that you cannot react to it anymore and the attack goes off. So in that sense, the initiative order would still keep going, because let's say if you were to take any action, whether it's 1, 2, 3 AP, and no one does anything about it, the turn would still continue as normal. So if the dragon were to charge up 3 AP and no one does anything about it, or no one has any more actions, then it would just proceed as normal. But if you were to charge this action and you wanted to spend your own AP from your turn to react against it, you would be able to do so, which in most cases would be like to dodge out of the way. So, and I hope this like not overly complex to explain, but it's something that I think while playing it sort of makes sense, because looking at like the costs, where because there is always like cost, benefit to it, because if you spend 1 AP to react to something outside of your turn, then that only leaves you 2 on your actual turn or anything else to do. So if I were to use 1 AP to dodge, then I only have like 1 medium action left. And if I were to, react with like, let's say I want to react with like a medium, then I only have 1 AP left. I can only do like a fast on my turn, basically. So either way is gonna be like the same for every person. You have like 3 AP, and it's just sort of whether you will trade it or not to sort of help to stop something from happening. And that's sort of what I've been workshopping, and why I like this so far is because it's sort of general and crunchy at the same time, meaning it has a certain rigidity to it, meaning it can sort of it's sort of easy to figure out, okay, I can do 3 things really quick, or I can do 1 quick thing and 1 normal thing, or I can do a really slow thing. And what I like is that you can sort of basically explain almost any kind of action within those confines. So let's say if I were to open a door, or to grab a potion, or to dash out the way, like a dodge roll, it would just be a fast action. If I wanted to do like to swing a sword, if I wanted to raise a shield, if I wanted to shoot like a firebolt, then that would be a medium action, because that's like kind of your bread and butter sort of thing that you want to do. If I wanted to charge a fireball, if I wanted to teleport someone, if I wanted to really like if I wanted to charge across the map and like hit someone, anything that is relatively complex, then it will be a slow action. So this is what I mean by like the hybrid kind of system, because in most cases I'll just describe it as fast, medium, or slow. But if someone wanted, if like someone preferred to use AP, and so that they could like be more granular about how they wanted to approach the actions, then it's also easy for them to sort of understand what is the cost for each. But for someone who is more used to like a straightforward type of system, then we would just say, oh, you used up your medium action, so you can only do a fast this turn. And I think that would be pretty easy to explain to a beginner player. And as well as this means that, of course, you have like abilities and things you can do, but if say you wanted to think up of something unusual to do during your turn, let's say I want to backflip over this guy's head and do hit him or something like that, then all you would have to do is, okay, that would maybe be like a medium, or like a medium plus a fast. So for custom actions, I think it'd be not only straightforward for players playing the game, but also I think people who are trying to like homebrew stuff, people who are like trying to want to make their own custom spells or abilities, I think using this system would facilitate everyone in a way that I think satisfies them all. So whether it's like new players who want like a relatively easy to understand action system, and then for people who want something a bit more complex to sort of make custom content around. So that's sort of where we're at with 0.5's action system, and that's sort of the main big thing or the tackle here. If you interrupted the wizard spell by making out with them, would it be a fast action? Depending on how involved it would be, it'll probably be slow. A normal kiss would be fast, I think. But see what I mean? You can just sort of immediately make like a sort of judgment call on how long that would take, and if it can be generally agreed upon, then you can probably do it. So so then, of course, then that led me to the question of, alright, so if I can technically do anything with those actions, why do I even need like abilities or spells, right? Because if I can just say I cast a fireball, I wouldn't need to learn a fireball spell to do it, right? So for that, to address that, we have the critical system. So that's another thing that is layered on top of this. So so where do I start with the critical system? So crits are, alright, I need to probably roll some dice. Let me get like a dice roller on Chrome. So if I were to, so let me open up Albert Rodeo. Let me put that aside. Alright, so create a free room. Continue with Google. So there's a thing here called crits, and if it lets me sign in, okay, never mind. Let me get a dice roller. Alright, I'll leave that there first. No, that's not a modifier. 2. Okay, so let's see. So here, for crits, so there is a thing that I sort of worked on this yesterday, so it's obviously in a very embryonic stage right now, but there is a thing called Brave Dice, and that's my neighbor's dog. And so for Brave Dice, so imagine for every single action that you wanted to do, right? Oh, that reminds me, I have to actually talk, before that I have to talk about the duration. So okay, so this is where things get a bit more complicated. So we have durations for each action, right? So before this, in version 0.4, what happened was that it sort of had like a similar system with other games, where I think Fabula Ultima has this, where you have stats, and those stats have a certain dice size. So obviously, like a D10 would be bigger than a D6, which is bigger than a D4. So in like Fabula Ultima per se, you would have like your might attribute, your stat, and that might be a D8, which means you roll 8-sided die for it, and that sort of represents your stat because it means you can roll a maximum of 8. And that's sort of what I did for this version, the previous version, where you had different actions and you would assign a die to that action, so that, you know, if you're better at this, then you would roll a higher number on it, but if you're not so good at it, you would roll a lower dice for it. But right now, I'm trying to test out a different system where the dice type actually is tied to the duration to which you would cast it. So let's say something like, so you can refer to this chart that I have right here, which is, it shows which actions correspond to the dice type. So if you were to roll a fast action, it would be a D4, meaning you would get at most a maximum of 4 on the dice. If you rolled a medium action, you could roll a D6 or D8, meaning it's a bit more of a higher potential. And then of course the largest, which is D10 and D12 for slow actions. So which means, let's say a sword attack, right? So so for a sword attack, instead of calculating like the level of the attack, like you know how like in D&D you have like a fireball, and then like, or the fireball has like, you know, at certain levels it gains more damage, or you would roll more dice for it. Here it's more like you choose the duration. So if I'm gonna do like a really quick little fire spark thing, right, that would be a fast action, which means that I would roll a 4-sided die for it. If I want to do like a standard fire bolt, like a little fireball thing, then that would be like, I would roll a d6 or d8 for it. And then if I really wanted to make like a really big fireball, like, you know, like a real big sphere of fire that I push out, that would be slow, which means I can roll up to a d12 for it. So then that means the same action, which is, you know, making a fireball, I would roll a different die based on whether it's like supposed to be really fast but not impactful, so like a d4, so that's just a 4, or if I wanted to get really big numbers on it but it's a bit it's slower, it's less stable, so I might get it low as well, because it might mean I might miss or something like that. So if I roll, I get an 8. So I think understood that way, it should not be too hard to sort of figure out like, okay, anything I do at all, whether it's a fireball, swinging a sword, or anything like that, there's no modifiers, there's no stat attached to it. You know, it's not like add your dex or add your strength modifier or anything like that. All you need to do is say, I want to swing my sword as a medium action, and then I would say, okay, roll either a d6 or d8. Or if I say I want to charge a really big swing on him, and then you would say, okay, roll a d10 or d12. Or if you say, I want to jab him real quick, then it would just be a d4. So that's sort of like, so each die type or die size is attached to the duration of that action, which sort of conveys how potentially powerful that ability could be. So then, of course, you could choose between, obviously for 2 of these, you can choose between 2 types of dice. So in most cases, you would want to pick the higher one, like d8 or d6. You would want to pick a d8 because it's just a bigger number, or d12. So if you want to make an action, so let's say I want to hit the guy, I would roll. So okay, let's say blue is what I'm doing, and then red is the enemy. So, oh wait, why am I doing this? I should just use the online one so you can actually see what's happening. So get rid of these two. So let me move to Chrome, where, right, so let's say that the left side is my attack and the right side is the enemy. So this system uses a contested roll system, meaning if I wanted to attack an enemy, so let's say I want to roll, okay, I want to roll to hit him, and then he says, okay, he's gonna try to save against it. So save just means he wants to defend against it. So I have to roll a larger number than the opponent to hit him. So 4-3, that means he fails his save and I deal 4 damage. Let's get a few more examples. 7-1, he fails his save, I deal 7 damage. 2-2, so in case of 2-2, in case of a tie, the reacting party always wins the tie. So if I'm attacking and the other person is reacting to what I'm doing, so in this case he's trying to save against it, he's trying to block it, then the reacting person wins the tie. So in this case, he deflects my attack and it doesn't go through. And 8-4 does damage. I want to get a case. So 2-6, obviously his save exceeds mine, so I do not deal damage to him. And that's the basics of how damage is tabulated here. But then back to that question of why would I want to ever choose like a d6 when I can roll a d8, or why would I ever want to choose to roll a d10 when I can roll a d12? And that goes into crits. So in most cases, when you roll an action, that is not correct. Okay. So in most cases, when you want to perform an action, you will just roll the one die, right? So to hit the guy, to move, to shoot, you will just roll one die for it, and that's it. Regardless if it's a slow, a medium, or fast, that's what you would do. But then you would be faced with a lot of very tough enemies that can probably roll like a lot of dice at once, I would say. So in a lot of cases, you will just not be able to match them at all unless they roll very low. So to convey that, how would you get like more power in order to do something? You have brave dice. So brave dice is just basically it's just a fancy name for bonus dice. So in any case, when you have an action, you can only roll one dice, but you have a resource. So think of it like a spell point or mana or energy, whatever you want to call it, that allows you to add an additional die to it. So we'll say that you have, at any given time, you have 3 brave dice on you. So that means you have 3 mana or 3 energy, right? So anytime you want to add to a roll, you spend 1 energy or 1 brave die and you would add it together. So, and then you don't add it together. You have to roll both alongside each other, and then you have to check what the result means. So you roll your action and your brave die together, and hang on. So would you make a more detailed video on the different locations and important places in the future? Yes, actually, Icy Storm. Me and Letters and Punctuation have been sort of planning like certain like maybe future videos we can make that have like that actually like go more into like the lore aspects and the factions of the world. So it's not just talking about the gameplay of it, it's also like, you know, about like different factions and locations within the world. So but for that we sort of need to prepare more stuff for it compared to a stream. So and that's like, you know, not like a stream where I talk about it at length, but it's more like an actual thing with like artwork and stuff like that. But that's sort of like in the future. But going back to this brave dice thing, so you would roll 2 of them together, and this is actually partly influenced by Daggerheart, and Daggerheart is a Critical Role's new system that's coming out, which is how Daggerheart works is you roll 2 dice together, which is one is called the Hope die and one is called the Fear die, which is basically your good and evil die, and you roll both together, and based on whether the good die rolled higher or the bad die rolled higher, you would get like a more positive or negative effect. So it's sort of influenced by that, but here it's sort of like in Daggerheart you would always roll those, but here it's more like you opt into it. So you would normally only roll 1 die, but if you roll like, you know, I roll like a 2, you know, that's not going to be enough. I want to add the brave die. I want to spend a brave die to sort of try to change my result. So so let's say I rolled a 3, and then my brave die rolls a 6. So in that case, I will take the high result because that's called like an advantage, right? So I would take the high result of the brave die. If it rolled lower than the initial roll, so if I had like a 5, but then maybe I could make it a little bit higher, so I want to roll a brave die, but then it rolled like a 3, that would cause the action to fail instead. So it's like you try to like overextend basically, and you sort of failed as a result, where you would have normally succeeded, but because the brave die rolled lower, you sort of stumbled or something backfires and your action sort of fails in some way. And if both roll the same number, then you roll a critical, and a critical is sort of its own entirely different system, where you sort of gain additional effects. So let's say if I were to move to my browser. So let's say that the one on the left is my action, and the one on the right is if I choose to roll like a brave die. So if I were to roll an 8 and a 1, so 8 and a 1, obviously if I already roll like a maximum of 8, I wouldn't need to roll a brave die, but assuming that I roll them both at the same time maybe, then the 1 will cause my 8 to be a failure even though I rolled max on it, because the brave die rolled lower than my initial action roll. So if I roll a 5 and 2, that's also another failure. 2 and 1 also still a failure. There's a lot of failures in a row. Okay, so 4 and 5. So let's say 4, and I had the 4 and it wasn't quite enough to breach the enemy's defenses. So I roll a brave die and then I got a 5, and 5 may be just enough to get past it, so I managed to succeed. I'm trying to get a crit here just to sort of convey, but it's kind of rare to get one, huh? Yeah, but in the case that the two numbers rolled are the same, which seems to be quite rare, so I think for a crit chance thing it's actually pretty okay. So say 8 and 8, then it would roll a critical, and a critical would activate an additional effect. So going back to Scribbers, so that would mean I won't go into all this yet because it's more than what I want to talk about today, but essentially criticals are how you would have like your abilities and stuff. So let's say you were to learn the fireball spell, and if you were to learn the fireball spell, so this is going back to the question of why should I want to learn a fireball ability if I can just sort of say, I want to use my medium action to fire a fireball, right? Well, because if you just roll like, if you just say I want to, let's say you're a mage, right? You're like a wizard, and you say, by default I think I should know how to cast fire, and then I'll say, okay, you can roll, you can cast a fireball as a normal medium action, and I'll be like, okay, I can do that. But if you want to actually learn the fireball spell proper, then that actually allows you to gain additional benefits when you roll a crit. So it's less like you not knowing the fireball spell, and it's more like you by learning the spell have like mastered or have a certain talent affinity towards it, that you would be able to benefit from any additional critical benefits from it. So if you didn't learn the fireball spell, then when you roll a crit, nothing really happens. You just roll like a normal crit. But if you actually know the fireball spell proper and you roll like a crit, it could be like it deals more damage, or the explosion range is bigger, that kind of thing. So I can go down to like some of the abilities I was writing, perhaps, and so you can sort of get an idea of what this looks like. So let me find it. So let's say like a weapon, right? Like a weapon or a spell, basically. So this is like equipment or things that you can basically learn or attach to your character. So like a great hammer, skull smasher on crit, meaning when you roll a critical, you inflict stagger on the target. So this is the entirety of a weapon's description. There's no, like a D12 or whatever. There's no set number for a weapon. You don't need to learn a certain proficiency to learn it. You don't need to know its damage number. You don't need to know. You don't really need to know much about what a piece of gear is, other than its critical, what it does when you roll a critical with it. And this I quite like, because before this I did not have any sort of equipment list or weapon list whatsoever, because in previous versions I did, but sort of did away with it because it was too much bookkeeping. Because like I said, I wanted to prevent bookkeeping and sort of memorizing what you had at any given time. So I did away with like weapons entirely and just said, whatever you want to imagine your character holding is what your character has. So like, so for like, more crazy designs, you want like a giant metal arm, or like a giant rocket fist, or a big, scythe thing. You can just say I attack with it, and it's assumed that you attack with it. You don't need like stats to it, which is good. I like that. But then I did realize that obviously not all players would maybe like know what to give their character at first glance. Like, I could give my character anything, but what do I give them, right? So it's nice to have like options that they can choose, like, like while reading, I like this great sword, or I like this dagger or whatever, and then I can equip that on my character. So then obviously, to sort of facilitate that, I needed something that had a simplified way to communicate weapons, and this is sort of what I arrived at, which is because, like I said, all the damage is rolled from that action roll that you did. So whether I'm attacking with a sword, a great sword, a gun, my fists, or any number of things, all I need to do is roll, and that's the damage I deal. It's not tied to the weapon, it's not tied to any stats, but that particular weapon may do something special if I roll a crit with it, right? So if they were the same number, like 7-7, then that particular weapon, let's say the great hammer, it does something special, which is it inflicts stagger on the target. It sort of knocks them out, that kind of thing. And if it were like a sword, then maybe it deals like bleed damage. So it depends. If you roll the crit, then it sort of then it changes based on what the gear actually does. And that's something that is, I think, quite easy to remember, because obviously you're not sort of like, while you're playing, you're not actually thinking like, do I have this right now, or do I have this at the moment, should I use it now or then? It's only like, I rolled a crit, that means I activate this. So at the moment it comes up is when it's relevant. So it's not like you're trying to remember, I should remember to activate my weapons trait thing that allows me to inflict bleed once a day, twice, that which I can use like 2 times a day before I have to rest. No, it's just, if I roll a crit, I can inflict bleed on him, and then that's all it does. And that's all you have to remember for like weapons. And I think that is like a solid place for me to sort of go about the design direction for this. So going back to clip, so I think what I've accomplished so far is getting close to satisfying some of these design philosophies that I've set out for myself. So let's see here. Oops. So, good crunch and light bookkeeping. So, you know, a decent amount of depth for combat while not keeping track of a lot of things at once. So that would mean, so the crunch, you know, with the variable actions, reactions to it, the light bookkeeping, you don't actually have to like special abilities are only relevant when you roll a crit. Anime style stuff, the variable action system, because you can just sort of like say, I want to do a backflip over this and do this, or I want to like deflect the bullet, or I want to like sort of, you know, chop this thing in half. You will just say it's fast, medium, or slow. So I think that sort of fulfills the sort of freedom for more anime style actions. Reactive combat, that also I think is satisfied, because, you know, it's sort of like if I do a medium action, then someone else can do a medium action to counter it, and that's the extent of it. So it has enough to sort of have you react to sort of either against enemies or to help allies, but it's sort of limited enough that you don't lose track of your turn. And then of course, tactical tile combat, I would say this is still a question mark, because everything I've said so far has not included tiles yet, actually. So it gets, so I do still want to like tackle, like really sort of tackle and make sure that the tactical tile based map thing works here, because what I've noticed so far, so I think like Fabula Ultima, Break RPG, Cloudbreaker Alliance, all these sort of newer anime style tabletop RPGs, a lot of them are shifting more towards like a zone based system. So if I can find where it says, so by zone based system, what it means is that instead of actually like calculating the tiles, what you would do is just have like certain general zones. So like what I said about there being like near or far or in melee range, that's sort of what these sort of newer RPGs have been doing, where you just say like, oh, the range is not 5 tiles, the range is just far or near or the next zone, and that sort of, I think it's been working well for those games. I think it's more pretty GM friendly as well, because the GM doesn't need to like think too much and just say, oh, it'll just be the next zone. But for me, while I think that is like a very elegant way of going about the action combat system, I still do want to implement tiles, simply because, you know, it's a combination of, it's what I'm used to, and it sort of matches more of the kind of vibe I wanted to do with like the whole Arknights, Fire Emblem, FF Tactics sort of feel to it. So if I were to use a simplified distance system, like using zones or abstract distances, I feel like Voyager Tactics would lose a bit of its intended identity if I were to do that. It would sort of make it just like a bit similar to all the other games already out. So I do, but of course I don't want to make a system that is suboptimal either. So I do want to keep workshopping it so that the tile combat and distance system really does work best with all of the rules within the system. So then, what else did I want to tackle today? So here, so what I've been doing, okay, that's one big section done. So the next section that I want to touch on is regarding GM-less games. So this is something that is been on my mind as of yesterday. So this is a bit to chew into, but there is the idea that and this was because of like talking within like the Fabula Ultima server, and the creator Emma was talking about how the sort of idea of a GM is has a lot of responsibility attached to it, because like the game master has to make up the story, they have to make up a map for people to fight in, they have to think out of the enemies, they have to check the rules and stuff. So in that towards that end, it's a very daunting thing to become a GM, that it sort of intimidates most people into becoming one. So which is why you have most people are only interested in playing games but not GMing them, of course. And for me, that's also been the case for me, where like I have been interested in like GMing Voyager, but I've always been like sort of intimidated by, number one, the workload involved of like trying to like form everything, but also like the social aspect where you sort of have this idea that you're sort of responsible for how well the game goes, and then you have like a group of multiple players that you have to make sure are entertained. So the pressure does feel quite daunting, which of course, as a person designing a game, if I do not know how to GM my own game properly, then that's obviously a very huge design flaw. So that led me to think about how would I go about designing Voyager so that it's so easy to GM that even I know how to GM it, or I would have no problems GMing it. Because if I were to use myself as a baseline, which is that of a player reluctant to be a GM, which I think is true for most players, then if I were to able to do it, then I think most players should be able to. And I've researched a lot into like GM-less RPGs, and that's so like for like anyone who really knows, like D&D or Pathfinder is actually a very unexplored niche that has a lot of games in it actually, because it overlaps. GM-less games overlaps a lot with solo RPGs, and that's like tabletops that you play by yourself, like you play by yourself. So like Iron Swan, games like that, where you just sort of like write down your experiences and like consult a table, or like you roll and see like what outcome happens. It's sort of like almost like a choose your own adventure type thing. So I did a lot of research into those systems, and so far I'm going to try and workshop that for this next version as well, which is I wouldn't say it's completely GM-less yet, because a lot of it was made with like a GM in mind, but I've always like sort of resonated with the idea of having either something that makes it very easy to GM, or makes it so that the role of the GM is sort of delegated towards different players in the group. So what I mean by that is that in typical tabletop games, the GM is normally the person who controls the enemies, who decides the story, who does all these things. But what a lot of GM-less games try to explore is the idea that because the GM, they also control like every single NPC. So like the players control one character, but then the GM is potentially controlling like hundreds of different characters of different types. And that's kind of expected at this point, because we are used to like the Dungeons and Dragons idea. But it is kind of unusual if you think about it, that all the players just like play one character, and then another person plays every single other character in existence besides the players. And that's a lot of work to think about, because it's like kind of treating them like they're like the computer of the RPG, right? Because the computer sort of like gives you all the NPCs that you interact with. But what if in GM-less RPGs, this sort of notion is challenged, and the idea of conducting combat encounters or deciding the story of the game or creating NPCs is becomes a task that's sort of distributed among the players instead, which is an idea I found very fascinating when I was researching it. So I've been trying to workshop it, and I've not found like a conclusive idea for it yet, but I do have some notes. Let me see. So if I have Obsidian up, calendar, character creation. So how do I begin with this? So let me paint a picture for you guys. So this is not a thing that I managed to explore in like Voyager to a great deal, but it is something that I've always like thought about. I thought about it while working on previous versions, but I never had like the opportunity to implement it until now, which is the idea that, so if you know me, you know that I like gacha games. I like Arknights, Genshin Impact, Honkai Star Rail, all these kind of games. And a lot of those games, the appeal is collecting characters, right? So you can like collect all these characters, and you can play them and sort of like form teams around them and sort of decide where their synergies lie. And what always fascinated me is that I always had the idea, could that actually like work in like a tabletop game where you have these sort of characters that you can create and recruit, but without all the bitterness and salt involved with gacha itself, which is you have to randomly see if you get the character. But here it's just like you recruit them and you make them, and then you can play them in the game itself. And I've always was fascinated with that idea that instead of one character controlling one player character forever, it's more like you create your own fellas, and then you can sort of like scatter them throughout the world, and then you can sort of like use them. There is parts of this in like the previous version with like the world building section, which is like in version 0.4, where the GM tells you like, we're gonna like together as a table figure out like, what sort of factions, houses they are here, like what sort of NPCs you might want to see, and then you give me the NPC idea, and then I'll sort of like try to pepper them out throughout the game, and you might encounter them, you might not, that kind of thing. So that was sort of dipping my toes into that idea. But the idea so far that right now, version 0.4, it has been following like the traditional RPG structure of you control a person that you make, and then the GM controls everything else. So it's very standard, and I think if that is the sort of game that you're used to, which I think most people are used to, that sort of thing, that is the sort of game you should run. But what I'm really interested in exploring for version 0.5, and what better time to explore wild ideas like this than in the early stages, is the idea that what if you could play Voyager like you could like a hero collecting game, like Arknights, like a Honkai Star Rail. So like you could make a few character sheets. You can make a few character sheets, like each player, and then while playing you would sort of like maybe take control of like one at a time, or you would like make like a team full of them, and then like you would sort of like throw them into the world and see what happens. So it's less of the idea that you are that character, that you embody that single character, and it's more like you are kind of like the equivalent of, you know, like the Doctor in Arknights or like whoever, where you're sort of like an observer who is sort of like delegating to these characters what they should do. Like that's the kind of idea where you did make the characters, and you know you can decide their abilities and all that, but there's like multiple of them, and you can sort of switch between them and get them into various adventures and combinations with each other. And of course, being that I think a lot of my target audience and people who I think would like this game are people who would be familiar with like this sort of hero collecting aspect, I think it might have potential for them to sort of to be an interesting game to explore. Obviously, you know, it's more straightforward to think of like the regular you control one character kind of idea, but I do want to keep exploring this idea to its sort of its relative its conclusion, and sort of see how well it works for Voyager, because it could be interesting that you could actually make like a bunch of characters and then sort of sort them out together into teams, and that's sort of a very Ruby adjacent thing as well, because you know people like making Ruby OCs, and I think in general a lot of people, like myself included, we like making characters that we don't end up playing, right? So, or like this character is going to be so cool because they have this ability and this and that, but of course you can only really play like one or two characters in a few games at a time, so you're kind of just left leaving that character sheet, that character idea you had on the back burner, and then you might not ever use them, and then you have like an idea for a new character and then you sort of ignore them. But if this game sort of incentivizes you to do that, to actually like make characters and like build them in different funny ways, so it's a bit less, attached, because you know you're not embodying this one character's life throughout the campaign, but it is still involving, and it still allows for like, I think, a healthy amount of like, I think it's like maybe it could be like a healthy amount of detachment, because that means you might be more likely to try out more unusual ideas, so like randomly generating characters just to see what you will get, and then making them work, and then you might grow attached to them through how unusual they are, or how like novel their abilities are. So and this like sort of calls to mind even like, I think it can be reminiscent of the feeling of like when I play gacha games like Arknights, and you get like the more standard units, but then I remember like the first time I got Shaw, and Shaw was like this sort of really unusual character because she was like this squirrel, the squirrel girl who talks really fast and who has like a fire hose. Like she doesn't have like a gun like everyone else, and then her entire thing is just like, she doesn't deal that much damage, but she can like push enemies. And at the time I was really intrigued, because that was such an unusual character to like to encounter so early in the game. Someone who just like pushes people and then has a very unusual personality, and I think I kind of want to capture that sort of same those kind of moments in this version of the game, where you sort of like come up with very novel ideas for characters, and you end up kind of just liking them because of, you know, how like, you know, like how people are like, oh, I know all these characters are like the main characters, but it's this little tiny gremlin that I like the most, you know, that kind of side character attachment that people tend to have. so that's kind of the idea I'm gonna workshop throughout this week actually. So because there's like a lot of things that I have to rewrite to sort of like understand this paradigm, because obviously you need to figure out like how to make different characters, how to facilitate, how do you decide the enemies, how do you explore stuff without like a strict GM deciding everything, like do you delegate it to a different player, is it like passed around between people, that kind of thing. But that's something I'll tackle another time. But the main thing I want to tackle regarding this is simplifying character creation, because and this is the last point I'll touch on before I end the stream, is the idea that so character creation as it stands now will not work in the system because it's too complex. Because obviously if you were to go through the same process for each character, so like deciding their race, their class, what abilities you have, how much XP you have to spend to give them this and that, what do you upgrade, what skills you give them, nobody's gonna have time for that unless they really get into it. So I wanted to make something that was very straightforward character creation, so that it enabled you to create characters that that are admittedly more quantity than quality, because you're kind of making more of them, but there's like less depth to how much you can like give them abilities and stuff like that. But I think it would be helpful to think of them as like, not like your main protagonist character that you follow, but it's more like a large cast of it's more like building a world with a large cast of side characters that you like. It's the way I think you should imagine this when you're creating characters. So you're sort of imagining people to populate this world with, and not someone who like represents all of your desires and hopes or whatever it is when you're playing the game. And that, so it's sort of like, and I think, and I'm still kind of skeptical because obviously it feels like I would not be as invested, but I think even in like other games, right? So other games have these sort of genres, like if something like a Skyrim open world type RPG, that would be the one where you make a character and you follow that person throughout the entire game. That's sort of the equivalent of like a D&D type character creation experience. But for this one, it's more like what you would expect from like playing a gacha game like Arknights or Star Rail, where you don't necessarily have a you may have the viewpoint character, that's like the doctor character, or like the Stel, that main the trailblazer character. But what you're really focusing on is sort of collecting all of these different people, and all of them have very simple kits, right? So it's not like D&D where you make a wizard and that wizard knows is level 20, and they have like all these stats and they know like 10,000 spells that work in different ways. It's more like, here's this character and here's like their main gameplay gimmick, which you can sort of mix and match. So what I'm thinking is like to have like several archetypes. So let's say like a mage, and then the mage archetype would have like like an elemental mage, a time mage, a healer, a druid, that kind of thing. And then to make a character, all you have to do is sort of mix and match different abilities from the archetype and combine them together. So let's say if I were to make a random character, I could make them like a full healer type of character. So this is like, using Arknights or Genshin terms, it's like or Star Rail, it's like your Hibiscus or your Natasha. It's like a very straightforward, this character, you pick an ally and you heal them, that's it. And that's sort of like the vanilla based character for that archetype, which is, let's say, it's like a healer or medic type. But let's say you want something more unusual, right? So so characters like Reed Alter in Arknights, she's a healer, but she also deals damage. She actually heals you based on the damage she deals on enemies, so that's already an unusual mechanic, right? Or in Star Rail, you have Luocha. Luocha is a healer, but he has a very different type of healing mechanic where he buffs your team so that they heal themselves based on the damage they deal. So this is already a very different type of healer, where it's sort of like an attack-based healer, right? So how do you build that? So maybe you would take like one ability from the healer archetype, and then you combine it with like a different archetype, like some sort of fighter archetype, or something else that sort of allows the two archetypes to synergize together in unusual ways, and so that character, attack healer based character, is a combination of these two different things that you mix and match together. And of course, along the spirit of these gacha games, they have a very limited skill set. So in Arknights, they only have like 3 major abilities, which they all have like 3 abilities and like a talent, which is like a passive skill. And in Star Rail, they also have like only like 6 or so abilities. So they have like a passive, they have like an ultimate active ability. So each individual character is kind of limited in what they do, obviously, compared to like an RPG character where you can learn and do anything. But they have a very strong identity, meaning when you make a character, or when, let's say, you're imagining yourself playing this game and you're making characters for this game, you're sort of making them as distinct as possible. So I want to make this character that is a, let's say you're at the table with a bunch of friends and you're playing this game, and you're sort of like figuring out, okay, who are the members of this team, or all this, the pool of characters we're gonna make. So that one is gonna make, let's make just a normal healer. We'll give her like the standard heal abilities. Okay, that's one. We need like a DPS character. We'll make this. But then as time goes on, and as you make more characters, you start experimenting with weird ideas. So it's like, okay, maybe we want an attack-based healer. Let's make something like that. Or what if I want to make someone who, like Blade, who like attacks but gains more damage when they become attacked? So this is like a revenge type character. Or what if I want someone who gives shields to everyone? So like a Japard character. So then all you need to do is to look through the shopping list of abilities and sort of pick 2 or 3 and mash them together, and that's that one character. And because there is no like stats per se, right? There's no like +3 dexterity or anything like that. It's just like you roll the dice and that's what you do. That makes it quite easy to track what each character does and is, without like having to figure out, oh, what level is this guy, what level is this one over here. We just be like, oh, I assume you have the sheet, like a card, you tick it, and that's essentially all you need to know about what the character does. And this is how I can sort of picture this sort of version going, if I were to sort of pursue it into this direction, where you have just like very bite-sized character sheets that each represent like a character and like their main gimmick, essentially. And then you will populate the campaign with these characters, and you will sort of take them on different adventures. So it really it would lean a lot more into that fantasy of like playing a kind of hero collector type game, and eliciting the same type of emotions that you get, like the sort of attachment you get by managing lots of different characters that interact with each other, instead of one character that you attach to throughout the entire campaign. So that's sort of my idea, because I think it has potential. I think it's definitely an unexplored space. There are, of course, some games I've seen where you do control multiple characters, but none that really like, obviously, and a lot of games that lean into like an anime type aesthetic. A lot of recent games definitely have like a more anime type feel to them, but none of them really try to capture the feel of like a gacha game, right? A gacha game where you have a large cast of characters that you love and grow attached to, and sort of like make teams and builds with. But in this case, is instead of going through the tribulation and suffering of trying to roll for them yourself, all you have to do is to just take a sheet, fill in some abilities, and you have that character essentially. So it's like kind of playing a gacha game without all the disadvantages and bad practices of gacha gaming itself, which I think could be interesting. So that's sort of what I'm going to try and workshop for the next week or so, to just see how it works. I'm going to like type out some rules to see how well it works and sort of get players into that mindset of how to do so. And you know, of course, it needs like materials. Like I need to rewrite all the ability lists. I need to rewrite how classes are sort of arranged. I have to arrange them into like more like general archetypes that you can take from, and that's sort of a big workload awaiting in the wings. But I think if I do get it right, it would, and if it works for Voyager specifically, it could be very interesting, very distinct, and I think probably, if done well, very good for new players to try, because it's something very familiar and like bite-sized for them to attempt. And if it doesn't work, then of course I can always just walk it back to how it was in version 0.4, where you have, you know, the one character that you follow throughout the campaign. And I think either way I would still write a rule where you can do either way, right? Where if you just, like by default, let's say you have to do like this multiple character thing, but if you wanted to play like a more traditional RPG, you would have no problems doing so. Or if you wanted to play for GM, all you have to do is just like, you would buy more abilities for this character or anything like that when you level them up. So I think if done well, it should have a way to accommodate both types of players. So that's kind of the main gist of what I wanted to talk about today. And so far, that will be where I'll be concluding this stream. And just to show off one last thing before I end the stream, obviously I've been sort of working on new art to sort of populate the book, because if I'm gonna make people sort of understand the system and how to play this game and like make characters within it, then obviously I need to sort of like draw them in with like nice art and all that. And so of course I'll be trying to like draw new stuff as well. One that I've been working on is a piece of artwork for Skotos. Skotos is the undead realm of the game, and that's sort of where like you have these creatures called the Tanin that sort of go around and attacking people. It's very like, they're kind of like grim, that, and then you have like characters who go and hunt them and stuff like that. And that's like where the undead classes, the Viamore, that's where they live. So I've been sort of like working on this illustration. This illustration has Gwyn in it actually. So Gwyn is one of my OCs that I have, and she's like she's also found herself here, and she's like part of the Chaos Jagd. The Chaos Jagd are the Wild Hunt faction essentially, and those are like a bunch of ghostly hunters and warriors who have like these monsters as pets. So this is like the illustration that I'm writing for that region. So like it's just like a bunch of like obsidian scaled beasts with supernatural abilities, and you can sort of like ride them into battle, although there's no rules for that yet, but I hope that you can actually implement that. And of course we got a little bird guy riding a tardigrade Tannin. And yeah, I hope to finish this as well, at least black and white. But other than that, that's all the updates I have for the big update bomb for the Voyager system. And tomorrow I think I'll be able to type out a whole bunch more stuff about, you know, the character creation stuff that I talked about. So hopefully by then I'm able to sort of share more of like what I have with you guys. And as well as I didn't touch on it earlier, but I have also been doing a lot of layout work on the book, which if you've noticed, I've started added like these headers to each section. So these sort of things, which are the top of each section, which are just very nice, evocative, cartographic map elements at the top of each section. And it's almost like you're reading like explorer's journal, where they have like little bookmark ribbons to sort of show you what section of the book you're in. So this is the world building section, and then at the start here you have this the introduction chapter. So we have like a different header here with like a different ribbon, and then you see as you go through each section, the ribbon sort of moves towards the right, and then you get different emblem to show what section you're in. The next section is the gameplay section. So this is a little blue header with a different map and like a little tile emblem. And then I hope to make these for like every single section. There's about 7 sections, I'd say, overall. So I need to make like 7 headers for these. And one for the adventure section, which I probably need to change a bit, but and for the factions, obviously the factions have their own headers as well, which I need to add because I've yet to update them. But Exodus has its own header, and Aiden has its own. But for the adventure section, the chapter, they also have their own ribbon, which is this, which is like a red header, and with a little guy here for the emblem. So that's one more step towards improving the layout of this book, just to make it like easier and more appealing for people to read. And I hope to include more stuff as well, because what I want to add to the side here is I want to add like probably like a little navigation tab on the side. So like what you would see in Break RPG as well, and in Pathfinder, and like a bunch of other books actually. A lot of RPG books have this, which is just like this sort of navigation thing at the side, which sort of shows you what section you're on and what just help you navigate it. So I'll need to sort of adjust the layout of things even more to sort of really make everything look nice and easy to navigate, because the more I work on this, the thicker the book gets, which means that I'm gonna need to put in more work to sort of make things easier for people to navigate. Stuff like headers as well, colored headers, section, things to show like chapters. So this is like sort of what I did for the headers as well. So that's sort of the progress check on Voyager. And with that said, I will see you guys hopefully tomorrow. Should be no problems with tomorrow's stream. And for all the new people, I thank you a lot for joining me on the stream and for following Voyager, and I hope that we can keep this momentum going, because I've been really pumped about working more on it lately, and hopefully with your support, I can sort of keep heading on towards a fast track to getting 1.0 released and in a proper playable state for everyone, that I can actually start promoting it properly and commissioning art and all that sort of stuff. So thank you all for joining me. If you haven't already joined the Discord server, the Tabletop Discord server, please do so. That's where I talk about Voyager game dev stuff. Every random idea I have about including ideas into the game, I just talk about it, and then people sort of like go back and forth on it. So it's pretty chill. So if that's what you like, if you're interested in game dev stuff, or just the Voyager setting in general, I recommend heading there and saying hi, and I will see you guys next time.